Good evening and welcome to AC Transit's Transit Talks. My name is Claudia Burgos. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs and Community Relations at AC Transit. Transit Talks is an opportunity for AC Transit's leadership team to share community updates on bus service, who we serve, and our plans for the future as we all navigate our way out of this pandemic. Our agenda for this evening is simple. We will hear opening remarks from members of the AC Transit Board of Directors. We will then move into a presentation of approximately 45 minutes, which will be delivered by key members of the AC Transit team, including our General Manager, Michael Hirsch. We will have 3 live polls throughout the evening to help us better understand how you're thinking about your future travels to and from work, school, and other activities. Representing Ward 2, we have Director Gene Walsh, as well as our at-large, one of 2 directors, Chris Peoples. Director Walsh is serving her first term, having been elected to the AC Transit Board of Directors in November 2020 to represent Ward 2. Ward 2 covers the cities of Emeryville, Piedmont, Berkeley, and portions of Oakland. Director Peoples was appointed to the AC Transit Board of Directors in November of 1997, elected in 1998, and then re-elected 6 times since then. He serves as one of 2 at-large directors. I will now turn the microphone over to Board Director Gene Walsh for a few remarks, and she will be immediately followed by Director Peoples.
Thank you, Claudia, and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this beautiful spring Thursday night. My name again is Gene Walsh, and I am one of the newest members of the AC Transit Board of Directors. I've been on the job for not quite 5 months. I ran for the AC Transit Board because I want to make transit fast, frequent, reliable, affordable, equitable, pleasant, and easy to use. It's a bold vision, and I know we can do it. I am first and foremost a transit rider myself. I haven't had a car since 2004, so I know what it's like to ride on BART and AC Transit and bike share and my own bike, the occasional Uber and Lyft. You know, anybody who's watching who is car free knows this feeling of having to sort of patch it together to get around and live your life. And because I take transit, that means I'm intimately familiar with the joy of and the freedom that comes with being able to go anywhere and not have to worry about parking or car payments or anything like that. And I'm also intimately familiar with the shortcomings and the pain that comes from having a transit system that is not reliable or lets you down. So I'm really wanting to make transit better for our most vulnerable community members who rely on it, who have no other choice, our seniors, our people with disabilities, our low-income people, and make sure that they have a way to get around that's enjoyable and pleasant and reliable. And that's another way that we can get people out of their cars and onto transit. We are in a climate crisis, folks, and we all know that, but we really have to take action. And one of those key things is in our transportation choices. So we need to make the bus more reliable, and we need to improve our transportation system so that we can get folks out of their cars and onto transit. I believe that it should be a seamless to transfer to other modes, and it should be easy. I think that transit fares across the Bay Area should be more integrated so people aren't penalized and have to pay twice and 3 times because they transfer to another agency. I think the bus should come when it says it's going to come. I think the bus should be prioritized so that the riders don't have to sit in traffic. And that's what I'm my vision for transit in the Bay Area. So I thank you all for joining us tonight, and I thank the staff for putting together this wonderful presentation. And I really look forward to everyone's questions at the end. And I look forward to learning about what's happening and as we recover from the pandemic and navigate a path forward. So I will now turn it over to my fellow board member, Director at Large, Chris Peoples.
Thank you, Jean. And you folks are all very, very privileged to have Jean as your director. She's bringing a lot of energy and a lot of good thoughts to the position, and she's got a background both at the San Francisco PUC doing public relations and public involvement, and in a number of other organizations doing transportation, and that's very useful. Ward 2, which was described earlier, is an area where there's a lot of interesting things happening. After many years of working on it, the cities have begun to be our partners. We did our first bus rapid transit in Oakland, not in District 2, but Department of Transportation in Oakland has begun to do bus priority lanes for us. The Berkeley Public Works Department has begun working on priority lanes for us. The Alameda County Transportation Commission is in the process of studying perhaps another bus rapid transit on San Pablo. All of that's very useful. And both Oakland and Berkeley have begun to densify their housing, which is something that's very important in order to get that's great. I've been car-free since 1998, and I experienced the same joys and frustrations as Gene. But anyway, I will now hand you over to our general manager. I've served with 5 general managers, and Mike is by far the best. Michael Hirsch.
Wow, Director Peoples, thank you so much for those kind comments. Director Walsh, thank you for your comments tonight. My name is Mike Hirsch. I'm the general manager. I've been here a little over 5.5 years. First, I want to thank our frontline workers, our essential workers, bus operators, mechanics, janitorial staff, cleaning staff. This has been an incredibly difficult year for all of us. We've had to make very difficult choices. Our frontline workers have responded as true heroes. Never in my career did I think we'd be carrying more people than BART, but that just tells you how important our ridership is, how transit dependent they are, and I'm just so proud of our employees for coming to work every day, working through these difficult times. So proud to be here with you tonight. So proud to be the general manager at AC Transit. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and for your continued support as we work to restore and rebuild service in the 13 cities and unincorporated areas of Alameda and Contra Costa counties. We pride ourselves as the 3rd largest public bus system. Right now, we're kind of 2nd largest. 3rd largest public bus system in California and 3rd largest transit agency in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our service is critical to the regional economy. Our Transbay service across the Bay Bridge, San Mateo Bridge, Dumbarton Bridge had surpassed over 15,000 daily riders before the pandemic and was a service that had consistently shown year-over-year growth. We were also getting 30,000 students to school daily. I'm confident that ridership will return. Exactly when, we're not sure, but we're watching it and we're working hard to hire operators and prepare for service ridership to return. Prior to March of 2020, we carried approximately 189,000 weekday riders and more than 53 million riders annually. As of last week, our ridership is still down 60% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Our Transbay ridership has been severely impacted due to people working from home and not commuting. If you've been in downtown San Francisco on a weekday, you see what a ghost town it is. But the pandemic will not last forever. When the economy reopens, we will continue playing a critical role in the Bay Area. Our transportation network, connecting with 16 other public and private bus systems, 25 BART stations, 6 Amtrak stations, and 4 ferry terminals. And when Alameda's Seaplane Lagoon ferry terminal opens, we'll connect to that ferry terminal as well. While our overall ridership today is a fraction of what it was before the pandemic, we continue providing a critical service, in particular for those that have continued to ride during the pandemic. AC Transit has always been a lifeline for many, and our service has always been a critical component of the fabric of many communities. Ensuring the sustainability of AC Transit service is truly a matter of equity, given that 65% of our riders are low income and 75% are people of color. A rider survey conducted during the pandemic revealed that those still riding are dependent on our service. 40% were making essential trips to work, to school, to medical appointments, to get groceries, etc. 15% identified as essential workers. 43% indicated they don't have access to a car. Today, AC Transit ridership is the second highest, as I mentioned, in the Bay Area, carrying more riders than BART on an average weekday and second only to Muni. During the pandemic, AC Transit staff has been hard at work every day getting service on the road. As I mentioned, our frontline employees, the bus operators, mechanics, road supervisors have come to work every day, getting essential workers where they need to go. And behind the scenes, AC Transit staff has been busy all year long on a variety of key projects, including Tempo, our bus rapid transit service. The first in the East Bay was launched in August of last year. We managed to do that in the middle of this pandemic. Tempo runs along a 9.5-mile route through the cities of Oakland and San Leandro, with 10-minute headways and buses traveling 80% of the route in a dedicated bus-only lane. We're seeing on-time performance levels of greater than 85%. That's unheard of in the Bay Area. We've had innovative technology. We've added innovative technology to assist our riders. Our information technology and marketing and communications departments have been focused on developing technologies aimed at improving the rider experience. This year, we launched our first ever official mobile app that offers ACT real time. You can see where your bus is in real time. A new contactless fare payment option using your smartphone, access to AC Transit's customer service center and customer service form for you to leave us comments or ask questions. Additionally, we launched the new rider capacity feature, which offers riders real-time information about capacity levels. We know it's been tough. With social distancing, we know we've had to pass people up. Buses have been drop-off only. On June 7th, we will be relaxing our social distancing from 6 feet to 3 feet. It's going to improve. Things are going to get better. We launched a new website earlier this year and completed a full renovation of our customer service center in downtown Oakland. It's now open to the public. In March, AC Transit was named Employer of the Year by the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of the Women's Transportation Seminar, WTS, in recognition of our commitment to the advancement of women in the transportation industry. In January of this year, we joined the Clipper Start program, a pilot program offering a 20% discount to eligible low-income riders. March of this year, we launched an all-door boarding pilot on 2 lines, the line 6 and 51B, to help speed up boarding by allowing riders paying with Clipper to board and tag their Clipper card at the rear door, therefore speeding up the boarding process and improving reliability. In 2020, we introduced battery electric buses to our fleet, adding to our current zero-emission fleet of hydrogen fuel cell buses. And when federal and state officials announced they would establish a mass vaccination site at the Oakland Coliseum, we answered the call by providing free shuttle service, getting over 3,800 residents to their vaccine appointment. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, we've remained committed to advancing projects to improve the rider experience and better serve our customers. We are already seeing evidence of change that is forcing all of us to plan and operate differently. And at AC Transit, we're doing just that, adjusting, innovating, doing our best to respond to the needs of riders and as travel patterns continue evolving. Staff has prepared a couple of live polls tonight to receive instant feedback that will help our planners in their efforts to build a bus network that is responsive to the needs of our community. In fact, we have our first live poll right now. Can we get the poll up on the screen, please? For those listening in, the question is, how will you travel once you return to work, school, or other activities? The choices are drive alone, carpool, ride public transit, bike, walk, take Uber or Lyft, or mix it up. We have a little bit of a countdown timer here to give people to get their responses in. And the results, interesting. We love to see that. Public transit at 38%, 8 respondents. Mix it up at 8%. I hope most of that's public transit, but we appreciate the response. Walk at 1 respondent or 5%. Biking, 10%. No carpool, and that's interesting. This is our 3rd talk or 4th talk, and we've not seen carpool. And drive alone, 2 respondents at 10%. Thank you very much for responding to the poll. And I'll turn it over to Nichelle.
Thank you, General Manager Hirsch. Good evening, Nichelle Lanes, Acting Director of Marketing and Communications. And I'm pleased to speak with you about the safety measures AC Transit has in place to continue to provide you with a safe ride. In accordance with the state and county mandates, AC Transit has taken a proactive approach to ensure safety and wellness measures for riders and operators. I want to emphasize and remind everyone that AC Transit, since the beginning of the pandemic, has and continues to require face coverings while riding on our buses. To aid in this requirement, mask and hand sanitizer, personal protective equipment, or PPEs, are available on every bus for our riders. Signage on every bus reminds riders to maintain a 6-foot social distance and to wear face coverings correctly. Our buses are cleaned and fogged each day with a disinfectant. All of our operators currently use the positive airflow ventilation procedure implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic. This procedure requires all windows to be closed, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, or HVAC, on, and the rear roof hatch placed in the fully opened position. This pushes particulates through the roof hatch and refreshes onboard air 50 times an hour. Additionally, our maintenance department created a COVID shield for each bus. This latching shield encloses the operator for more protection from the spread of COVID-19. Finally, buses will have a COVID limit line on the floor near the operator to ensure a 6-foot distance between riders and operators. So one of the challenges of social distancing on the buses, and the general manager referenced this in his slides, is a significant reduction in the rider loads we can typically carry. We're limited to about 25% of our normal bus loads. That's 10 to 24 riders, depending on the type of bus. And as we comply with CDC guidance on rider capacity, when our rider capacity has been reached, we must make the difficult call of not onboarding additional riders. We realize that with fewer seats available due to these social distancing requirements, knowing the bus capacity levels as you plan your trip or before you plan your trip is a critical factor in successfully navigating our system in this unprecedented time and beyond. To that end, our innovation and technology team added a new feature to assist our riders within our ACT real-time bus arrival predictor. The GM again mentioned this in his presentation that the rider capacity feature enables riders to view real-time bus capacities by line. You'll see on the slide the iconography that shows you just visually how you can tell whether the bus is at capacity or not. Additionally, once a bus has reached its capacity, our operators reach out to our Operations Control Center, or OCC, to send out another bus to ease overcrowding. I'm now going to turn it over to AC Transit's Chief Financial Officer, Chris Andrzejczyk, who will present on the topic Emergency Funding for Public Transit.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening. As she said, I'm Chris Andrzejczyk, the Chief Financial Officer for AC Transit. I manage all aspects of the district's finances and make sure we have the funds we need to provide the essential service for the public that we serve. Tonight, I'll offer a high-level overview of AC Transit's financial condition and how we're getting through the pandemic. So first off, the emergency federal funding we received so far has been a lifeline. And to be clear, this funding has replaced the operating funds we lost during the pandemic as ridership plummeted. It's not additional funding. It is emergency funding that has kept us afloat. To that end, AC Transit received $114 million from the initial Pandemic CARES Act in the middle of last calendar year. We used $30 million to fill in revenue losses in our last fiscal year, which was fiscal year 2019 through 2020, and the remaining $84 million to fill in revenue losses for this fiscal year. Looking at our next fiscal year, which is fiscal 21 through 2022, we don't think the economy will be back to normal. nor do we think our regular revenues will have returned in full for the next fiscal year. We will be using the second federal aid package, which is known as the CRISA Act, to fill in the about $56 million in revenue losses we project for the next fiscal year. So again, the takeaway here is that we currently have been able to balance our budget to date, thanks to the federal aid we've received, and also because we've reduced expenses and are providing, unfortunately at this time, just 75% of the service we would normally provide. Prior to the pandemic, AC Transit was in a pretty good financial position. What has helped us in this pandemic is that AC Transit has a more diverse revenue source mix. A combination of sales taxes, property taxes, fare box revenues, bridge toll funds. We're a little different than some of the other transit agencies. The property owners in most of AC Transit service area pay $8 per month in parcel tax to support our essential service. We are extremely grateful to these voters that have continued to support this measure throughout the years. Stable funding like this has helped keep our revenues from dropping as much as other agencies, particularly those that depend on farebox revenues, such as BART, Caltrain, San Francisco Muni, and Golden Gate Transit. The chart on the right shows the different types of revenues that a selection of different agencies receive. The point of the chart is to show that we're all funded from a different mix of sources. And for those on the phone, it's a very colorful bar chart with about nine different agencies on it, and just shows the different distribution of revenues that each agency has. So it's hard to predict what will happen with the economy and transit ridership looking forward. This is not a normal recession we're in. However, based on prior recessions, we do think it could take a couple years before employment levels reach what they were before the pandemic. And since March of last year, as many of you know, many jobs have been moved from the office and into our homes. We are hearing and expecting that work from home and outside the office or workplace will continue to some degree for those that can, which will mean reduced Transbay and local ridership. We are doing our best, but cannot control when people might return to transit, particularly if they have other transportation choices. So we are fortunate and very grateful to have received 2 rounds of emergency federal aid to support our operations so far. This federal funding has been critical in stopping the bleeding, but it has not made us whole. President Biden recently signed the American Rescue Plan into law, which will provide a 3rd round of federal aid. At this time, we do not know how much we will receive. However, emergency federal aid will not continue forever. So we must plan for a service level that we can support with our regular revenues once the federal aid runs out. Next, Robert Del Rosario will talk about how we plan for future service. But before that, we have another poll for you to participate in. So this poll is asking how many days per week will you be commuting? The answers are I will work or attend school from home, 0 days, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 or more days, and I don't know. And here we go. So our #1 choice for tonight is 3 days with 30%. After that, 5 or more days, 22%. And then I don't know, or I will work and attend school from home at 13%. Then 0 days with 9%, 2 days with 9%, and 1 day with 4%. Now I'll turn it over to Rob.
All right, thanks, Chris. And good evening. As Chris mentioned, my name is Robert Del Rosario. I'm the Director of Service Development and Planning for AC Transit, and I will discuss our current and future plans for service recovery and restoration. So at the onset of the pandemic, over a year ago, and also the start of shelter in place, AC Transit immediately reduced service to 65% service levels because of a significant drop in ridership. We dropped 74% initially, and now we're down 60%, that's 60%. And there were concerns over a potential lack of available workforce, including bus operators. Fortunately, due to the federal funding that Chris had mentioned, we were able to increase and sustain service levels at 75%, with ridership increasing to 40% of pre-pandemic. The increase was to primarily bring back our trunk and major corridor routes up to pre-pandemic service levels, where we're seeing the most overcrowding. We've also been able to make recent minor additions, particularly with the start of some supplementary school routes in response to the reopening of schools. In addition to implementing incremental service increases, we are also starting the planning and analysis for full restoration of a new network. 3 key factors are needed to be considered by the district for service recovery. 1 is available funds, 2 is available resources, particularly bus operators, and 3 is an understanding of future ridership patterns. Chris was able to give you an update on the budget and our financial situation. With regards to resources, we do need to hire and train operators along with all of the other transit operators in the region that are in similar position. AC Transit was fortunate to not lay off operators, but we did have operators leave either through retirement, attrition, or their own will. CDC guidelines and Cal OSHA regulations limit the number of operators we can train. So that has to change in order for us to increase our training capacity. And also meeting hiring demand in the region is going to be an issue as all transit operators try to increase service. So we are exploring creative solutions to try to increase our operator recruiting and training throughput to hopefully speed up that process and get service increased as soon as we can. We also need to collect customer travel data via outreach, surveys, and other data sources, such as traffic patterns, cell phone data, and I'll talk about our future outreach so that we can receive this information from the public. Our goal is to implement a new service network that responds to the new normal by August of 2022. Along the way, we plan to engage in robust outreach to inform the planning efforts, board approvals, and implementation. However, I do want to emphasize that the August 2022 target is for a new route network. We will be able to incrementally increase service along the way, reactivate suspended service at any point before that time as funding and resources allow. Some examples, we're looking at adding service in the South County area in June. We intend to bring back a vast majority of our school service in August if schools fully reopen. And we hope to start some pilots later this year. Seaplane Lagoon in Alameda and the new Alameda Point developments is one. We're getting a lot of concerns about the Ashby corridor and line 80, which I've seen in the Q&A. We're hoping to bring back some sort of pilot service along Ashby corridor and try something new out so that we can pick up the ridership along that corridor. And then we're also looking at improvements to Chabot College in South Hayward. On to the next slides. So here's a map along with our routes for the existing network in North and West Oakland. This first map really is the heart of AC Transit service area. It includes downtown Oakland, West Oakland, the neighborhoods around the lake, Emeryville, and the Temescal. This is where we see the bulk of our ridership and where we brought back the most service to pre-pandemic levels. Note that in this area, as with most of our service area, we have suspended most peak Transbay routes due to low demand and an unknown future of Transbay commute patterns, though we are seeing some ridership growth on Transbay recently on the few routes that we do operate. So we are strategizing to bring back Transbay lines as demand grows. Next slide. So this is an extension of our core area going into Berkeley, where we also reinstated many of our lines with high ridership demand. Those service is less on weekends, particularly in the Berkeley Hills, and which I can also address in detail once we get to Q&A. Next slide. And here are the remaining routes in this area. Like I said, we acknowledge that line 80 continues to be suspended due to limited resources and low demand before the pandemic. We are currently exploring a pilot and at which we can then bring back the service along the Ashby corridor and hopefully get that up and running again soon. You can also see, as with the downtown Oakland area, we do have very limited Transbay service in Berkeley. And as stated, we're strategizing on how we can bring back Transbay service so that it's meaningful and useful to our customers. Next slide. So back to the future plan. Here's a more detailed overview of the plan to reach a new network in August of 2022. The process will include, as I mentioned, multiple outreach points for information gathering, plan feedback, and implementation, with development of the plan in between. This process was initiated with transit talks meetings, such as the one today, to inform the public of our recovery status and plans to seek public feedback. Our first meeting was on April 26th, and this will continue on into next week as we go to other regions in our service area. In the fall, we plan to conduct another round of more in-depth outreach to get an idea of travel patterns and customer needs, looking at some of those examples of data inputs that I mentioned earlier. And then we'll use that information from the outreach to feed our planning process and develop that new network. Once staff develops a draft new network proposal, we will set a public hearing for final public feedback and engagement and board approvals in the spring of 2022. If we have an approved plan, we will then commence public outreach to inform our riders and the public of service changes scheduled for August of 2022. So that's our future network plan in a nutshell, as well as some of our attempts at incremental service increase. And this also brings us to our final live poll question. And this is really to get feedback from you on how we bring back service. So the question is, help AC Transit set its priorities for recovery. What actions should come first? The choices are improve service to disadvantaged communities, improve service on major transit lines where ridership is highest, increase service to cover as much service area as possible, and restore trans-based service. So as with other transit talk meetings we held, the answers are a little bit balanced. There's responses for every single type. But for this area, number one was with 12 responses or 41% was increased service to cover as much of the service area as possible. Number two, with 7 responses or 24% was improved service to disadvantaged communities. Number 3 was a tie between improved service on major transit lines where ridership is highest and restore trans-based service. So thanks for your time and listening to our service planning recovery strategies, and I'll turn it back over to General Manager Hirsch to continue the presentation.
Thanks so much, Robert, and good evening, everyone again. Thank you for your attention. It's great to see such good participation tonight. We'll start the Q&A portion shortly. I'd like to share some project updates with you that are not related to the pandemic, but are important to our future operations. Since the year 2000, AC Transit has been building the most comprehensive zero emission or ZEB bus program in the United States, initially focused on hydrogen fuel cell technology, and most recently expanded to include battery electric buses, making our zero emission program one of the most sophisticated programs in the country. Today, all of our zero emission buses are prioritized to serve our most disadvantaged communities, which are also the most impacted by environmental factors. We're currently running a side-by-side comparison of hydrogen fuel cell, our battery electric buses, in addition to conventional diesel, diesel hybrid, and our older legacy fuel cell buses. The study will offer detailed comparisons of each technology's performance, reliability, fuel efficiency, capital, and operating costs. All transit agencies in California are required to operate a 100% zero emission bus fleet by the year 2040. And in many ways, we're well ahead of the curve compared to other agencies in the state. However, our challenge will be securing the funding needed to upgrade our facilities and build the infrastructure needed to adequately accommodate a 100% zero emission fleet. That's over 540 buses. We currently have several corridor projects underway, which are aimed at enhancing operations and improving service reliability along the Telegraph, Grand, West Grand, San Pablo, and Dumbarton corridors. These projects include installation of Transit Signal Priority, or TSP. That equipment allows our buses to communicate with traffic signals for faster travel along these corridors and to give buses priority at intersections. Bus stop relocations from the near side of an intersection to the far side of an intersection to prevent our buses from being stuck at traffic lights and to improve access to the curb. as well as accessibility or ADA improvements. Lastly, we're actively engaged at the state legislative level to help advance legislation that prioritizes transit on our streets and highways. Former Assembly member, now Attorney General Rob Bonta, introduced a bill that will improve transit service into and out of San Francisco by installing a transit-only lane on the Bay Bridge. With Bonta's confirmation as State Attorney General, Assembly member Buffy Wicks has agreed to carry the bill. If passed into law, the bill will play an important first step in helping to improve the reliability of our Transbay service, which is frequently bogged down in traffic jams. Through the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force, AC Transit is working with other Bay Area transit agencies to coordinate service planning, operations, communications, and our response during the pandemic. Most importantly tonight, we are hiring bus operators. If you're looking for work, if you know somebody looking for work, please visit actransit.org/careers. Robert Del Rosario talked about how resources are critical for us. We need the dollars, but we also need the operators, maintenance, and supervisors to be able to increase service. This includes improving regional connectivity, improving the customer experience, particularly as it relates to travel on multiple systems, and focusing on equity to make sure that the region's transit network is accessible and affordable to all. I will conclude my remarks here and hand the mic over back to Claudia to introduce the Q&A segment of Transit Talks. Thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, General Manager Hirsch, and thank you to all of our presenters this evening. We recognize that was a lot of information, but we thought it was important to share with you not only the ways in which we've been impacted by the pandemic and our response, but also to highlight the other key initiatives that we've been focused on during this pandemic year, all of which are aimed at improving service quality, reliability, and the rider experience. With that, we're getting ready to transition to the Q&A portion of our program. I'm going to start the first question, and this one's going to go to our Director of Planning, Robert Del Rosario. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A regarding the Line 65. So here goes the first. I live on the Line 65 in Berkeley, which has been on holiday schedule all year. I don't have a car and I need to get to work and get groceries. I'm trying to lessen my carbon footprint, thank you, by using public transportation. Will you please increase the frequency of our service? There is also no weekend service. Please help. Robert, that one is for you.
Sure, and thanks for the good question. And I know this has been an issue for those living in the hills. You know, when we reduced service down to Sunday service levels, we knew that we would have some challenges ahead in bringing back service. And we were able to bring it back to 75% service levels pretty quickly because we were able to get some federal funding. And that increase in service was primarily where we knew that the ridership demand was highest. We of course have a capacity limitations on our buses, and so we had some pass ups, and we wanted to bring back our trunk routes primarily, you know, routes on San Pablo, College Avenue, those that carry a lot of people. We want to get those back to regular service levels as much as possible, so we avoided the pass ups. And we were successful in doing that with a 75% service level. Now that we have some possible future funding coming, we can start looking at these other routes that may have less ridership, but are also very critical. They're critical to our network. Line 65 has been a mainstay in AC Transit for years, decades. So we do want to bring it back. We just have to make sure that as we recover, we're trying to bring back our resources where they're going to be used the most and needed the most. So going backwards from the August 2022 timeline, we'll make sure that we incorporate what we're going to do about Line 65 weekend service. And then as resources allow along the way, we can bring back suspended routes. So including Line 65, we're going to look at all the ones that are suspended and figure out what we want to bring back and start prioritizing that order of return. But 65 on the weekends is absolutely on our radar.
Thank you, Robert, for that answer. This next one is going to go to Nichelle. This is from a staffer at UC Berkeley. Go Bears. Let's see, has there been any updates to monthly pass partnerships with employers? I am a staff at UC Berkeley, and with campus going back to in-person instruction in the fall, I rely heavily on AC Transit for my commute.
This is a great question, and thank you. I'm glad you rely heavily on AC Transit for your commute, and it makes me realize that I should have been evangelizing this program on every single transit talks that we've had so far. So UC Berkeley faculty and staff are great partners with AC Transit on our AC Transit Ezpass program. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with that program, it is an annual pass, discounted pass for employers, residential communities, and 2- and 4-year colleges within the AC Transit service area, and places where AC Transit goes. This program is fantastic. It's an annual program. It should be considered a benefit to employers in residential communities and colleges. You get an annual pass that will allow you access on AC Transit anytime AC Transit is in service, and it uses a Clipper card, so we can monitor. We get to see boardings and be able to report back how great the program is for our clients. We did not, because it is an annual program, we actually did not deactivate any of the passes. So your pass should be valid now that you're coming back to campus if you currently have an Ezpass. If you don't, head down to the Office of Parking and Transportation and make sure that you have one, but it sounds like you do. It should be working. There was some visibility about cards not working. The cards do work. The challenge is it's a product of the technology where if the card becomes unused for 6 months, the pass gets deactivated, but that pass can be easily reactivated and working again. So please, I encourage you to start using your pass again. It's open and ready for you. And I encourage anyone else who on the call who is interested in exploring more about the Ezpass program to reach out to AC Transit, and we'll get more information out to you.
Thank you, Nichelle. This next one is going to be for Chris. This participant states, I was at a rally in San Francisco today organized by Union Transit employees and concerned riders. They are demanding that MTC create a plan to spend the money being provided by the American Rescue Plan. What are you doing to get this money from MTC to resume regular transit service?
Well, thank you, Claudia, for the question, and thank you to our listeners. We have been working with MTC for a long time. Well, we work with them all the time, but particularly during the pandemic, we've been working very closely with them to make sure that we get our fair share of the federal funds that have come to support transit. Particularly now with the American Rescue Plan Act, we have been actively involved in the discussions that they're having. MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is the regional transportation planning agency, they are talking with all of the transit agencies and many other groups to see how these funds should be distributed. In addition, we presented our draft budget to our board of directors last week, and our board of directors gave us direction to assemble a list of needs that we would like to be funded through the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And so, that is something else we're doing, is we're going to be working on that and bringing it out with our proposed budget to, to show the needs that AC Transit have, so we can get, our fair share of that funding.
Thank you, Chris. This next question is going to go to Robert. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A that are related to the line 80. So here is one that came in. When will AC Transit return service to line 80 through South Berkeley along Ashby Avenue? This is a vital link to Ashby BART station, which is being developed for transit-oriented housing. Can you share what the line 80 pilot will be and how it will be publicized? It sounds like a couple of people joined and maybe they caught the tail end of what you were saying with regards to that pilot. So maybe if you could sort of recap that for those that may have missed it. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, sure. So line 80, just like line 65, there's always been service on Ashby for years and years and years. And when the pandemic hit, we had to reduce service And line 80 was one of those routes that ridership was okay. Productivity, which is passengers per hour, was pretty low. And we knew this pre-pandemic that we needed to do something to line 80 to get it working better. So it was one of the routes that we had suspended because we just didn't have the resources, and we had to use our resources pretty judiciously where we're going to carry the most riders and frankly to avoid our pass-ups. But we are looking now at a pilot for Ashby and trying to figure out how can we better connect it so that it's a more useful route. What we're exploring is having it go towards Emeryville, where there's more retail, commercial, other types of resources for the residents along Ashby to connect to. We'll be bringing this pilot proposal to our board of directors, I believe at the end of May. I think in two board meetings from now, we're hoping we can bring this proposal there. If not, it'll be early June. And then we can get a gauge of if this is a pilot project that we want to proceed with. And then we'd have to see what our resources are that allow us to implement this. We've talked about dollars, we talked about operator resources. Those are two key pieces here to try and bring it back. But we have every intent to hopefully implement this pilot sometime soon in the next few months, hopefully maybe before the end of the year, so that we can bring back service along the corridor.
Thank you, Robert. This next one is going to go to the general manager. In order to enable increased service frequencies in the next few years and beyond, is AC Transit actively advocating for the Biden administration to create a dedicated source of transit operations funding, in particular via the transportation funding reauthorization process?
Absolutely, yes, is the answer. Not only do we employ lobbyists in Sacramento, but also in Washington, D.C. We send letters urging for our fair share of funding. It's looking better than it has in many years for us for several reasons. Even our board president, Elsa Ortiz, participated in a Bay Area Council meeting with Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg, where she made the plea directly for AC Transit to get our fair share, to base transit funding on equity and for communities like ours that are so transit dependent. Our facilities, we have 4 operating divisions, all built in the 70s. We have a facilities master plan, so we to rebuild our facilities and upgrade them for the zero emission bus fleet that I mentioned. We hope to be prominently included in the infrastructure bill or infrastructure plan. Earmarks are back. If the public's not aware, we've submitted earmarks to our delegation. We are very active in Washington, D.C. and will continue to be very active. The other thing I will tell you is that the Secretary of the Federal Transit Administration is Nuria Fernandez. I once worked for her. She left Valley Transportation Authority in Santa Clara County to take the FTA position. Our vice president is from Oakland. So we have a very, very positive outlook for not only infrastructure funding, but the transportation reauthorization, better funding for transportation, public transportation in particular. Secretary of Transportation and the president have indicated they support that. We'll continue to fight at the table for our fair share.
Thank you, General Manager Hirsch, for that response. This next one, we're going to circle back to Robert. This is somebody who got here a little late and missed if there were any details about possible service restorations on the line 7, particularly on weekends. Robert, that's for you.
Yeah, I think the story is pretty similar as line 65, where the service into the Berkeley Hills, it just had low demand at the onset of the pandemic, and so we do want to bring it back, but we also have to just look at the trade-offs of scarcity of resources and where do we use those limited resources. And I think our top priority now is probably addressing pass-ups, but you know, service on the Arlington has been there for years. Weekend service on the Arlington has been there for years and decades. So I'm fairly confident that we're going to explore this as part of our 2022 network plan. And then as resources allow before that time, we're allowed to bring back suspended routes, including something like Line 7 on the weekends, which is certainly on our radar.
Thank you, Robert. We're going to go to the GM again. This is somebody who wants to know how many staff members you are down since the start of the pandemic. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the operator challenge that we're currently facing and impacts our recovery plans.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. And I appreciate the question, so I can plug applying for jobs at AC Transit again. Just speaking of operators, it takes over 1,300 operators to put the service out. Last time I checked, we're about 80 down. We have started classes. We are actively recruiting. It's not just operators. We need field supervisors. We need mechanics. We are transitioning to a zero emission bus fleet. So not only are we training mechanics, but we're also looking for the future mechanics that want to work on zero emission buses. Again, actransit.org/careers. I cannot push enough how incredible our operators are. We are a family. This is a living wage job, a union job with a pension, and you're giving back to your community. It's one of the greatest pleasures I have is knowing how many people we transport every day, that they are transit dependent. These are great jobs, but just through normal times, we lose between 8 and 10 operators per month through normal attrition. We have an aging workforce, and this is not unique to AC Transit. The entire Bay Area, quite frankly, California and most of the major metropolitan areas in the United States have struggled to recruit bus operators. So not only are we seeing people retire, they've earned that benefit, but we're competing with the rest of the economy to try to rehire. So I can look you in the eye and tell you AC Transit's an incredible place to work. Please help us spread the word, tell family, tell friends, post it on your websites. We are advertising all over the place and we'll continue to do so. Again, the short answer is we're about 80 or 90 down. That fluctuates every month. So it's a moving target.
Thank you, Mike. This next question is going to be a tag team response here. I'm going to look to Nichelle and then Robert. So this is somebody who has given an example waiting in West Oakland for the NL she's from a friend from West Oakland was waiting for the NL at the Transbay Transit Center. When they started boarding, by the time it left, there were so many people waiting that they could overfill the next bus. So part one question has to do, if you could address, Nichelle, our new rider capacity feature. And the second part of the question is about whether we have plans to improve evening Transbay service when BART isn't in operation. So I'll hand it over to you first, Nichelle, and then to Robert.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for taking NL. That's my line. So I have special affinity for the NL. Secondly, I'm sorry that this happened to your friend. It's never a good feeling to be left at the bus stop for any reason. You want to go when you need to go. So I'm sorry that you were left at the stop because of our social distancing measures. So there are two ways, and I mentioned earlier in the slide deck, to try and address this issue. I'm going to talk about one, and then Robert's going to talk about the other. So the first is our rider capacity feature, which can be found on ACT real time through our website, through our official AC Transit app, through a number of third-party apps, including Transit app and Google Transit, will provide for you for the line that's coming up, the bus that's coming up, as well as the 2 or 3 buses behind you, the amount of capacity we have at the stop. And we use both the actual numbers and iconography to let you know whether the bus is fully available, whether it's getting full, or whether it is at capacity through 3 different colored figures on our real-time departure features. And that will change. So you might see something that's at capacity or not at capacity 3 or 4 stops down that is at capacity once it gets toward you. So it's really important to continue to monitor the line to make sure it's not at capacity as it's nearing your stop. If it is, or if you can kind of guess when you look 2 or 3 stops ahead that it may likely be at capacity, you may want to make some other plans. Maybe wait for the next bus. It's hard because this is at the end of the line and it's late. But we try and give you that option to at least plan your trip so that you're not left at the stop in what could be an uncomfortable situation for you. But Robert's going to talk about the other way that hopefully we avoid this problem altogether through our shadow buses and adding buses. So I'm going to let Robert talk about that.
Sure, thanks, Michelle. The NL is at pre-pandemic levels. So it operates, I think, every 30 minutes during that time of night. So I think what we're looking at in the future is at some point we're going to get out of this pandemic and we'll hopefully be able to get to higher capacities on our buses. Right now, a 60-foot bus allows for 16 passengers. If we say get to 3-foot spacing on our buses, then we can double the capacity. So that's one thing that will happen hopefully in the future, near future. And then the second thing is that we do provide standby buses. So we'll try to track the NL closer and see if we can put standby buses wherever they're needed. I know we were looking at the NL pretty closely, so that's something that we'll continue to do. And then the third piece is as the region recovers, we should see more services out there. So BART will likely have more late night service starting in the late summer to address more demand.
Thank you both for your comprehensive responses. This next question is going to go again to the general manager. This is a good one. What has AC Transit learned during a deeply challenging year of racial justice protests and pandemic conditions? And how has that changed AC Transit's leadership approach to ensuring the agency's work benefits people in historically disadvantaged communities?
In some respects, it goes back to the funding question. It's amplified what many of us in this industry already know, particularly in AC Transit. We serve a transit-dependent population, but quite frankly, we do not have the resources to adequately service it. We need more funding, both state and federal. We need to encourage people to get out of their car. We need to continue to tax gasoline and funnel that money to public transit. Public transit follows Title VI, so we do equity analysis to make sure that the service we operate is equitable and fair. But if you study this issue, our deployment of our zero emission buses in communities that have the worst air quality is a perfect example. And this is AC Transit, one transit agency in the United States where we all need to do a better job of this. I can tell you as a general manager and leading an incredibly diverse leadership team, this has been the most difficult year, and I think all of our careers. There was no playbook for a pandemic. We have seen the injustices in our community during a pandemic, and we've had to respond to both. I'm proud of the way we have, but I'm still disappointed that we don't have the resources to do more. You have our commitment to continue to do so, to continue to do meetings like this, to be in touch with our community. I wish we could restore 100% and more tomorrow. What we will do is do our absolute best to get the employees hired, trained to safely operate the service and continue to operate, again, based on the earlier question, to fight in Washington, D.C., to hope that we get 8 years of this administration who's finally going to prioritize public transit. I can tell you it hasn't been a fun year to run a transit agency. Our employees, quite frankly, are exhausted. I thanked our frontline employees. It has been a struggle. They have had to put themselves in challenging ways. We all know how there's been division in this country, just over masks as an example. And our frontline employees have heroically responded to that. I can tell you one thing, we have the book now. We have learned from this. We will keep the lessons learned. I hope we never have to go through this again. Everyone on the call should be fighting, should be messaging both your local and federal elected representatives to better fund public transit.
Thank you, Mike. This next one is going to go to Chris. Sorry, Chris, we haven't forgotten about you. We know you're there. We're trying to keep the rotation here amongst all of you. So here's one. Can AC Transit look into using their public lands for workforce housing? Offering AC Transit riders a home is a way other public agencies are keeping up retention.
So thanks for the question, Claudia. So certainly, you know, AC Transit is always looking to sort of maximize the use and you know, revenue or whatever that we get out of the land that we do have. As a bus agency, we don't really have a lot of extra or, you know, unused land like, say, you know, BART or other rail agencies do. We have, you know, considered whether or not some of our facilities, our existing facilities, could you know, support housing or other uses along with the operational use that we have for them so far. And if, you know, if any of those possibilities, you know, come up that, you know, make sense for the agency and for the community that they're in, we would certainly pursue them. But we don't have a lot of spare land that, you know, would immediately support housing. So I will say, though, that AC Transit has done a lot of work with low income and affordable housing developers in the East Bay. There is a specific grant program from the state of California that's funded through cap and trade greenhouse gas revenues. And this program pairs affordable housing developers with transit agencies and cities to get funding for both the housing and the transportation elements. And AC Transit has been heavily involved in this program. We've been a party to several successful grant awards. And AC Transit staff is, you know, we've always been very engaged, and we think it's a great program. And we, you know, we try to do as much as we can to help the developers, you know, help their projects score well so they can win the funding to complete the affordable housing developments they have. So we are certainly doing what we can in this area.
Thank you, Chris. I'm so glad you mentioned the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities program that we've partnered with so many nonprofit developers on. We don't talk about it enough, but certainly our partnership has really helped to bring in state dollars for those projects and ultimately increase affordable housing in the region. So that's something that we're very proud of. I just had to plug that in because I think that's just such a great partnership that we have developed there. Okay, this next one is going to go to Robert. The disability community has complained that the transfer between the 51A and the 51B at Rock Ridge Station is inconvenient. Long term, we need bus routes combined into one and prioritized bus lanes to compensate traffic. But can AC Transit stop mandating across street transfers?
Sure, no, that's a great question, and it's been a concern of many that we've heard throughout the years, as well as some of our board members. When we split the Line 51, the issue was that the Line 51 was so unreliable, and you often had times buses coming 3 at a time. It happens occasionally now, but definitely not as frequently as it did when the route was put together. So when we broke it apart, the reliability and the on-time performance greatly improved on the route. But the trade-off was how do we fix that transfer and having that transfer there. I think the issue is we can't fit all of the buses on one side of the streets there on College Avenue. We need 2 buses for the 51A, 2 buses for the 51B to be able to park there and lay over. Potentially there's more buses that could come. And so we just start to run out of space, which is tough on a narrow road. So really your solutions are probably one of 2. One is, could we figure out some sort of capital project at this location where we can build a transit center, which is pretty tricky for a non-street transit center, but it's something that we have explored in the past, and there's just a capital cost to be frank that's associated with that. The other option is, can we do the transfer somewhere else and possibly have the routes overlap some, maybe going further down to Pleasant Valley, downtown Oakland. I think there were even thoughts of MacArthur BART, but looking at something further down the line where the transfer can happen and there's more overlap and more opportunities to transfer as a result. but that also has an operating cost that we'd have to consider. So we're looking at it, but I think there's some physical challenges as well as some financial challenges associated with that.
My record before we split the line was 5 51s nose to tail.
Thank you, Director Peoples, and thank you, Robert, for the response. Okay, I'm going to take this one last question here from the Q&A, and then we're going to check on the phone lines to see if folks on the phone have questions, and we'll probably have time to come back to a couple more here. So this one is going to be for the general manager, and it reads, in the past, my experience has been that drivers have not been able to monitor and prevent harassment and theft on buses because their focus is on safe driving. Given that we know drivers cannot comprehensively monitor and address behavior, how will mask and other safety requirements be enforced so that riders feel comfortable when ridership increases?
Yeah, what a great question. I would say our first commitment is to making sure that the disposable masks are on all the buses. We were one of the first agencies to deploy the masks and hand sanitizer on the fleet. We will continue to do that for the foreseeable future, certainly as long as masks are mandated. I hate to see a bus have to pull over and wait, but the operators are empowered that if there's a disturbance on the vehicle, if someone is not complying with the federal mask mandate, it does come from the Biden administration and the FTA. If we have to, we'll pull that bus over and we'll call for road supervision to handle the situation. Again, we like to try to encourage it by having the masks available. Usually pulling the bus over and saying we're not going to continue until it's resolved actually resolves 99% of the issues. The other thing we've done is if you've been on the bus recently, you may have noticed a video monitor positioned so that as you step in the front door, you can see you're being recorded. Our fleet, 100% of our fleet is equipped, as are most buses in the United States, with closed circuit TV monitoring. We have seen that that has also cut down on incidents with operator assaults. It's a sad statement that operators do get assaulted. Our new buses will be outfitted with a barrier. We've been working with our unions to make sure we select a barrier that the operators like. CCTV monitoring and have the masks available, and if we have to, pull the bus over and call for supervision.
Thank you, Mike, for that comprehensive response. So let's see. First, I'm going to ask Chantal, who is staffing our Spanish line. Chantal, do you see any raised hands on the Spanish phone line?
Good evening. We have no questions from the Spanish line. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. And Stephen, do you have any questions on the Chinese phone line?
Hi, there's no questions tonight on the Chinese phone line.
Thank you. Let's see. I don't see any raised hands from phone participants. Tammy, can you correct me if I'm wrong? I don't see any raised hands from phone participants.
There's no raised hands from the phone participants at this time.
Okay, thank you. I do see 2 raised hands. If you could please put your questions in the Q&A chat box, that would be fantastic. If you already have, I'm going to look for your names and try to pull your questions out of there. Let's see, there's another question that we have lined up here from one of the Berkeley Transportation Commissioners. Regarding the network changes being considered over the next year or so, is the intention for minor adjustments or are you considering larger changes? That one would be for Robert.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that question. For August of 2022, we are looking at a new network, so a major network overhaul. What we're thinking is that over the next few months, we'll have a better understanding of travel patterns. And we think that they'll be different from pre-pandemic, especially with more opportunities to work from home for many people. So that'll give us a chance to reorganize and restructure our network to better meet the new normal. So that's why we're looking at August 2022. We can have the public hearings, the outreach process, the planning process, all lead up to that time. But in between that time and up to that time, we are looking at incremental improvements. We can reinstate suspended routes as resources, both financial and bus operator allow.
Thank you, Robert. I see a question here that maybe will require a part response from Robert and a part response from Chris. And it reads, if bus service was more frequent and reliable, more riders would use it instead of driving. It's a bit of a catch-22 to say there isn't enough demand, so you won't increase service on certain lines. Perhaps smaller buses would be a useful option on some routes. So maybe, Robert, you can tackle it from a planning ridership perspective. And Chris, you could talk about whether or not that has any impact to our budget.
Yeah, sure. I think we know definitely that there is higher ridership demand on our trunk routes and our major corridors. So San Pablo Avenue, University, College Avenue, Broadway, Shattuck. And that's where the most density is. So there's more opportunities for people to ride the bus. And that's where we're seeing the pass ups. And that's a big challenge for us, is people who went out there and wanted to catch the bus and they couldn't. So we have to focus our resources where people are getting passed up and the most people can use the bus. The hills are important. They're important for the network. They're important to connect people to other AC Transit routes, to BART, to downtown centers of employment and activity. But in terms of priorities, the demand isn't as much as our trunk routes. So that's the biggest challenge we have. And I know there's always a regular question about smaller buses. Really, the focus of our cost is on the bus operator, not necessarily the size of the bus. There's some minimal changes in cost with fuel, but really negligible in the bigger scheme of things. Really, the cost is the operator resource. And so smaller buses wouldn't necessarily equate to cheaper costs for us.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Robert. That was something I was going to touch on if you hadn't hit it. That it is really what costs AC Transit the most money is employing the many operators we do to put out our service. And I'm unfortunately in the position of often being the no person in the agency, because we'd all like to put out more service, but it's really a question of the resources, the dollars we have to do these things. And so while certainly we understand that catch-22 argument that if we could just put service everywhere, then we could possibly attract more riders, but we are unfortunately in the position of having to try and distribute the limited resources we have in a way that we think will best gain us ridership and best help the communities that we serve.
Thank you both, Chris and Robert. So we have a question which actually might be a perfect segue into closing out the Q&A, and this is for our board members. So I know you're both there, and the question is, I'm gonna give me a second here to find it again. For the AC Transit directors, what are your biggest AC Transit priorities in the next 6 months and why? And you could wrap this into your closing remarks.
Sure, I'll take a shot at that. Probably the biggest priority is figuring out how we reduce the social distancing. What's killing us right now is the 6-foot social distancing. And so it's important for us to figure out how, in terms of either vaccinations or ventilation or whatever, to be able to get that down. It's killing us not only on the buses, where we're down to about 20% of our capacity. We could run the same number of buses that we did pre-pandemic and only have the capacity to carry 20 to 25% of the people we did pre-pandemic. That can't continue. We can't survive that way. It also is killing us in terms of the resources, in terms of people. Not only are our buses have to have social distancing, but our classrooms have to have social distancing. And that means that our classes for new operators are severely limited. So that may not sound sexy, but that's probably the most important thing to get us back rolling. The other thing is, and we've got a bunch of people working on this, is trying to figure out a long-term sustained operational funding. We've been, as Chris Anderchek has pointed out, we're surviving because of federal bailouts. Those are not going to continue forever. I am hopeful. I mean, I go back to Washington about twice a year and do lobbying. Various other board members go back for the APTA lobbying day or for other lobbying visits. We've been working at this for a very long time. It's still going to be state, local, and regional funding that's going to create the bulk of operational funding. There's a lot of work being done on trying to figure out how we do that in a fair way. Now looks like it'll probably go on the ballot in 24. But that's in the next 6 months, that's a continuing thing that we need to work on. Jean?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, great question. Well, I would say one thing that I am highly focused on is transit prioritization. Nothing bugs me more than to be on a bus with 40 people inching along behind traffic and cars with one person in the car in each one. So I really think that, you know, we need to make the bus faster. And one way to do that is to prioritize transit wherever we can. This means working on that Powell Street interchange that I know that Councilmember Bowders has been working on and staff for many years, getting that to go through so that the bus can turn around and get on that highway faster without inching along stuck in traffic. Working on that AB 455 that Assembly Member Bonta put forth to get a bus lane or some sort of faster transit on the Bay Bridge. So looking for opportunities to do that on San Pablo, on Durant, on MacArthur, all of those quick build and longer term projects to get the bus to move faster, something I have a lot of interest in. Another thing is a broad overall overarching goal of affordability. And what this means is discounts for getting people the discounts that they are eligible for. For example, we've signed up, AC Transit is part of this Clipper Start program, 20% off for low income folks. I want to make sure people get signed up for that if they're eligible, so they get that discount that they deserve. I want to make sure that we are able to integrate fares when possible. There's a big effort going on with MTC, and I know there's a lot of hesitancy about how this is going to work, but I do think fundamentally that we should have the vision to get to a place where people don't have to pay 3 different times if they transfer to BART and another system and AC Transit. You know, there should be some sort of a discount or a fare capping or something so that this trip doesn't penalize people and cost them so much money. So that's, you know, it's not a 6-month goal, it's a longer term goal, but it's still a goal that we're working towards. Ezpass falls under the banner for me of affordability, because this is a pass that we can get into people's hands and they don't have to think about it. They actually have a free pass for AC Transit that they could take them anywhere. So I'd like to expand that program, get more people onto that program so they have a pass and they can take AC Transit. And then I think the third thing is communications with riders. This is a really critical time. The schedules are changing, that there's sometimes the buses are full, or you know, the bus line has been canceled, and people want to know, when is my line coming back? When is my bus coming? And so there are a lot of ways we get that information across to people, whether it's the posted schedules at the bus stop, or whether it's the app that shows when the bus is coming, or whether it's a session like this. I think all of this is really important because it helps people understand what to expect and it increases reliability. So that's you know, keeping my eyes on the prize of making the bus more reliable. So I would say those 3 things for now: transit prioritization, affordability, and improved communication so that the bus is more reliable and comes when people think it's going to come. And I have a lot of other things, but I'm trying to prioritize. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Walsh and Director Peoples. That was fantastic. Maybe we'll end on that note, the remaining Transit Talks sessions that we have. So we have 2 left. next Monday and next Thursday. We invite you to join us again. If we didn't get to your question, we apologize. We really tried to get through as many of those as possible, and we left half of the program dedicated to Q&A. There are ways that you can stay involved. Visit our website at actransit.org/talks. Send us an email, talks@actransit.org, or give us a phone call, or send us something in the mail. Again, we have 2 meetings remaining, next Thursday and next Monday. When you leave the Zoom, there will be a satisfaction survey that will pop up on your screen. Please take a moment to complete that. Thank you all for joining us, and good night. See you next time.